From witnessing a Chechen with a 100% knockout ratio to fighting a 6-1 box tuber millionaire, here's why Artur Beterbiev versus Jake Paul needs to happen. In his most recent fight, the WC, WBO, and IBF light heavyweight title holder completely demolished Britain's Anthony Yarde at Wembley. And get this, the man's 19-0, with all 19 of them being knockouts. Are you kidding me? Beterbiev's the only world champion that has a 100% knockout ratio for all of his fights, and he even obliterated one of the scariest light heavyweights in the division, Joe Smith Jr., like it was nothing. Even Artur's sparring partners question what they've gotten themselves into after just a few minutes of training with him. And knockout artist Callum Simpson would agree. Artur's 50-50 boxing stance gives him impeccable balance and helps him generate an ungodly amount of leverage with those monster fists. Short right hands, hooks, and uppercuts. No one wants to be on the receiving end of that. When most fighters at the age of 38 begin to slow down and think about hanging up their gloves, Beterbiev still wants all the heat. But no one expected Artur's name to be put against the problem child, Jake Paul. So far, we've seen some very unlikely matchups in this YouTube crossover scene. Call it a WC multiverse of madness. And Jake Paul's finally proven that he can hold his own against a pro boxer. Now, fans are curious to see who he can take on next. But how did the Beterbiev versus Paul conversation even begin? Jake congratulated Beterbiev on his win against Anthony Yarde while plugging in his own betting app, Better, in the process. And yes, the plug game is real. Anyway, after the fight, fans were asking the all-important question, what's next for Beterbiev? And the lightweight heavyweight has expressed his interest in fighting Dmitry Bivol. But fans replying to Jake's tweet had a different proposal. A Twitter user reminded the Ohio-born box tuber that he's in the same weight class. So, will this fight ever take place? Fans started saying, there's no way Beterbiev's actually going to consider this. But yeah, plot twist, he just did. Artur Beterbiev officially came out and told Jake Paul to call his promoter. Apparently, Beterbiev's eager to make easy work of JP in the first round. And even though he praised Paul for defeating Anderson the Spider Silva, he criticized Jake for fighting UFC fighters, saying it's not the same as fighting a real boxer. Hey, what's I told you so in Chechen? After Tommy Fury, Beterbiev hopes to give Jake a piece of what an actual boxer feels like. And as for Jake, you know he'll want to come back super strong after that defeat. And what better way to prove your worth than against someone of Beterbiev's stature? Heck, even if Jake loses the match, at least he'd be losing to a 3-time world champion. The fight just makes sense. Even though it may be unrealistic on paper, the fight comes at the perfect time for both boxers. I mean, think about it. Jake's been persistent in his pursuit of facing Tommy for the second time, and even Fury's claimed that he'll fight him tomorrow if he has to. But from a viewership standpoint, I don't think that'll really work. Don't get me wrong, Tommy Fury versus Jake Paul did amazing on the pay-per-view numbers with 800,000 buys. But a Fury versus Paul rerun isn't what the fans want. Been there and watched that. On the other hand, how about a true David versus Goliath matchup with Beterbiev versus Jake? And imagine if Jake manages to get upset, that will take his stock soaring to newer heights. I say forget KSI, it's time to shoot for your Canelos. As for the Chechen brute, I'd be licking my lips thinking of the paycheck I'd receive for the fight. Say what you will about Jake Paul, but the man brings in the numbers. In Tyron Woodley's fight, both fighters got paid $2 million each. Considering there isn't much competition for him in the light heavyweight division, Beterbiev must be eyeing easy money fighting Jake Paul. Skeptics may call the fight a no contest from the start, but don't rule out Jake just yet. Joe Rogan, a man who has decades of experience in the fight game, recently gave his thoughts on Tommy Fury versus Jake Paul, saying that Jake is, in fact, a legitimate boxer. Of course, in the first few rounds of the fight, we saw Jake's nerves get to him. But once he found his rhythm, you could see Tommy was nervous. He even scored a knockdown in the dying moments of the match. And let's not forget his scary knockout of Tyron Woodley that had the former UFC champion sleeping. After the Anderson Silva fight, Even the CEO of the WBC, Mauricio Sulaimán, praised Jake and claimed anyone who thinks Jake isn't a real boxer is a hater. Jake has the power, work ethic, and passion necessary to succeed in the sport. Yes, he'll trash talk and say borderline absurd things, calling out Conor McGregor and stealing Floyd Mayweather's hat, but the fact of the matter is that's just to sell fights. Or maybe the Fury fight was the humbling Jake needed to take him to another level. Beterbiev better not underestimate Jake if the fight does happen, because champion or not, boxing is a sport where anything can happen. But individual glory aside, why does this fight need to go down? Well, it's just good for the sport. Ever since the YouTube boxing scene picked up steam, we've seen more and more people become interested in the sport of boxing. This was at a time when the UFC was the only entertaining mainstream fight game, and what Jake did so beautifully in the sport was bring in a much-needed edge. I'm talking about the trash talk, the bitterness, like what we saw in the good old Mike Tyson days. Heck, Tyson himself has openly endorsed Paul, claiming that he's done wonders for the sport, and going up against Beterbiev would not only bring in a lot of pay-per-view buys, but it would expand the scope of what's possible in the sport. Jake told ESPN that people are overcomplicating the path to the belt, and according to him, the rankings really limit what can be possible in the fight game. Jake believes that he doesn't need to be up there in the rankings to be worthy of a title shot against Beterbiev, and we've seen the likes of Mayweather getting a piece of the box-tuber pie by fighting Logan Paul and Deji. If Artur vs. Jakes does happen, it'll be the very first time a boxer, who once made vlogs, fights against the current world champion. Nowadays, fights can break down due to contractual disputes, people ducking, and weight issues. So what boxing needs right now are pay-per-views and the millions of dollars that come with it. It's just business. Even if Mauricio Sulaimán doesn't regard Jake as a legit boxer, he'd still want him to keep the gloves on because of the numbers. Beterbiev versus Jake Paul would push the narrative of ultimately giving the fans what they want to see. And what a story would that be? What grabs the hearts of fans is a compelling story, and with Beterbiev, we really have one. Jake Paul's currently in his redemption arc, and he doesn't need boxing. He could just go back to making YouTube videos, focus on his various businesses, or even retire. But according to Jake, he's found his calling, and he says that this is what he was put on earth to do. Before his fight with Tommy, Jake told Piers Morgan that he loves big moments and loves the high stakes that come with the fight game. The man has a net worth of $30 million, but he chooses to persist and pay his dues in boxing. When most fighters are seen flexing their cars and their millions on Instagram, Jake's flexing in the gym every single day, putting in the work to be the very best. If Jake holds his own against Beterbiev, that'll only prove that with enough tenacity and passion for the sport, anyone can make it into boxing. So there you have it, fight fans. From fighting a 6-1 box-tuber millionaire to witnessing a Chechen with a 100% knockout ratio, that's why Artur Beterbiev versus Jake Paul needs to happen.